Everyone. I'm super excited to be here. This is my first webinar, so yeah, it's weird for me to not be able to talk to you and see you, but yeah, I will try to make it as a little bit more interactive in the end. So again, thank you so much for joining. We will learn more about how permissions and user groups can help you securely share your digital assets today. We have a ton of exciting content to cover. It should be around 20 minutes. But just before jumping in, I'm really curious to know how familiar you are with permissions in the DEM. And yeah, so let's do a quick poll. Ian's faster than me today. Yay. Well, we got here like that 54% use it all the time. So this is great. Some people are familiar with it, but don't really know what it is. And this is their first, and a couple of people, that's their first time. So even for you that is here and is super familiar how it works, that will be a great webinar because we will learn a few best practices that you might not have come across before. So let's just get started here. So let's get started and talk about permissions. What are permissions and why are they important? Why are we here in this webinar? So permissions, they control what content a user has access to. So I like to give the example that without them is like if you have a house and your house is open and anyone that walk by in the street can come in and grab whatever they want. We don't want that. We definitely want to protect your house. And that's where permissions come into play. So one, permissions control what content a user can access to. This gives you like kind of functionality that users can have access to certain categories only. So that's what we call access, and what permissions they have in the DEM, and that's what we call permissions. Adding to this, some content have specific copyrights and restrictions. So for example, you might have something that's specific to a client only, and which means that you need to protect that at all the time. And the DEM management permissions come into play for that. So here, also just reiterating that permissions control what kind of functionality a user has within your digital asset management system. So there are some users that will have more of an active role in your DEM, and those are like probably your administrators. And there are some other users that we are going to see shortly that will have like more of a not so active participation, and they are our end users. So let's just move on here. So how do permissions work in MediaValet? So MediaValet uses category access management, which we call CAM, to manage permissions. And along with that, we also have something that goes with it, that are the user groups. So as I mentioned, that we manage permission on a category level. So by organizing your content in different categories, you can ensure user permissions are set up in a way that each member only have access to assets that are relevant to them. So for example, you might create a category for each department within your organization. With category access management, you can ensure that only the finance department has access to the finance category in your DEM. This is extremely important because some departments, such as finance and HR, have confidential documents that need to be gated from other users. User groups go hand in hand with your category structure because they allow you to select the access level a user can have and which permissions in which permissions they have, like download, upload, share, for example. Your organization can have an unlimited number of user groups in MediaValet, but a user can only belong to a single group. So let me here. So how do we get started with permissions and user groups? I always recommend Make it fun. Get a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. If you like wine, go for it too. And think about all the different people who need access to your DAM. I like to separate them in internal versus external and administrator versus end users. I know some of them are a little bit self-explanatory here, but just to give you a quick overview, internal users are part of your organization, and external users are people you collaborate with, but are not employees. These two groups will require different levels of access. A good practice when setting up users, like internal versus externals, it's to think about the role that they have in the company. So for your internal users, for example, like your groups, think about the departments that you have. For example, the marketing team and creatives may have different levels of access and permissions, as they likely will be creating content that will be consumed by others in your organization. So for external users, their permissions will differ depending on the collaboration that they have with your organization. So for example, a freelancer graphic designer that you work with often needs to find some assets, some photos that they will use to create brochures and posters. They will need permission to download and upload assets to your DAM, because they will take the photos, create the brochures, and need to re-upload them in the DAM. Very simple workflow, very common, we see that quite often. But you might have a photographer that's uploading weekly and needs to be able to create new metadata. So they will have a different permission from the graphic designer in this case. And administrator versus end users, the administrators, they have much more power. They are like the ones running the DAM, and the end users have a little bit less permissions and different access. So the example of administrators are marketing manager, like for example, running a DAM for the whole organization, or a DAM manager or library that's usually used for organizations that are a little bit bigger. End users, they usually have limited access and permissions when compared with administrators. They can be internal or external, while administrators are usually internal users. There are cases that administrators are external, but I haven't come across that very often. Examples of end users are an account manager who logs into your DAM to share sales sheets with clients, or a member from the HR team who accesses the DAM to download images for a presentation. Oh, sorry, getting back here. One of the best practices that we'll review at the end, I will touch them along the presentation, is to keep the number of administrators to a minimum. That will ensure that you have a more secure DAM, and will help prevent potential misuses of content, whether it is intentional or accidental. So the next step on deciding how to create your user groups and going through this process is decide how granular you want your user groups to be. We have two types of user groups in MediaValet: the default groups and the custom groups. So the default groups, they are also known as system groups. These groups are already built in your DAM and ready to include and ready to use. My apologies. These groups are typically administrators, contributors, and users that have permission to view only. They are great to get you started, but I really like and I recommend using custom user groups. The reason I recommend using custom user groups, it's because they offer more flexibility, which we'll see later on our best practice. That's one of the best practices we recommend: create flexible groups and scalability as well. So with custom groups, you are able to customize it to your organization, tailor it, the access and the permissions to suit your unique workflows and your organizational structure and collaboration requirements. I recommend, as I said, I recommend to all my clients to create custom groups, as this gives them more flexibility and scalability. in case your organization needs shift in the future. So move on here. I want to do an exercise together and create a user group with you. So this is based on a real client that I had in the past, and I just changed their name here, and I'm going to call them JMs, my initials, and Burger Bliss. So JM's Burger Bliss is a Canadian food chain, and they have a franchise. They have franchises across the country. The head office needs to ensure that each franchise will only access marketing materials and promotions that are relevant to their market. The admin needs to create a custom group for each franchise region, with access limited to only the categories or folders specific to each location. So I'm going to change here and stop sharing my slide, and I'm going to pop in something different. I'm going to look to a different screen here. So my apologies, I'm not looking directly at you right now. Ian, can you just let me know if you are able to see the spreadsheet I'm sharing? Ian, yes, perfect, thank you. So if you've been through the onboarding process, you likely have seen this spreadsheet before. This is something that me and my team tend to share with users. I highly recommend using this user group tab, even if you are no longer onboarding, just to map out the user groups that you want to create in the DEM. It will help you to have like some documentation to share with other stakeholders and discuss the access and permissions that their team might need before popping in the DEM. So what I did here, since I create a user group for each region within Canada. If you're not familiar with the regions in Canada, that's a great opportunity to learn more. And I also create the permissions, the permissions I want each user group to have. You see here that each group have similar permissions, I mean, the same permissions, but they have access to different categories. So when we go back here into the DEM, when we go to the DEM to create those user groups, let me just come in here and then actually, I was playing with it yesterday. I'm going to delete this guy here. Just a second. So before we get to do that, let me go back and show you how to get to the user groups. So once you log into your DEM, like here I have my DEM that I created for this demonstration. And what you will do is go to the gear sign menu here at the top right. You're going to click here and you're going to go to groups. When we get here, you will see that we have system groups. Those system groups are the ones that we were talking about in the presentation that come ready to be used. They're great, but there are a few things that I like to customize in them. And that's why one of the other reasons that I recommend using custom groups whenever possible. So I'm going to click here and add new, and we are going to create a new group. So let's start here with the Central Canada. And I might be going back and forth just so we can see our spreadsheet. So here in Central Canada, I'm going to give a name to this group. You can give a description if you wish, like the categories that they have access or some permissions. It's up to you, just to facilitate when you are looking through all the groups. I'm going to select custom because I want to create a custom group. And I often recommend, instead of filling out all the options that we have here, to copy permissions from a group that is really similar to the one that you are looking for to having. In this case, contributor suits very well what I'm trying to accomplish here, because they have permission to view, download renditions, and submit assets. Submit assets mean to send them to be approved by an admin before they are visible by other end users. So that's exactly what I want to do here. I want those assets that are uploaded by those user groups to be reviewed by an administrator before they're available for everyone else. So I'm copying the permissions here from contributor, and there are a few things here that I want to change. So I'm okay with all the view options that this group have. I'm okay with my group not seeing access with watermark. I want them to be able to use the assets anyway, so I'm not going to watermark them. The upload is great. They will upload pending for approval by an admin. And the edit permissions here are also exactly what I want. If you want to get a deeper dive on what are all these permissions here, I know there is quite a lot to choose from. Feel free to connect with me or your customer success manager, and we will be happy to walk you through this process. One recommendation that I make often to all my clients is to always give them access to share originals and or renditions, because the originals are the highest resolution assets in your DEM. And we want to give them access to that, so they will not come back to you to ask for the assets that would defeat the purpose of having a DEM. So I'm going to give them access to that. This group will not need to generate CDN links, so I'm going to change that option. And here in download, I also recommend, again, to give access to original or renditions. So for download and share, I often like to switch to originals or renditions. I will give this group access to cropping because it's pretty harmless. They can download and crop it somewhere else, so they can copy it straight in the DEM. I will not give them access to manage and crop templates, because that I often recommend to be managed by the marketing or creative team only, because all the templates created by other users are available for everyone else to see. Here again, in the sharing option, I'm going to click and share originals or renditions, and I want this group to have access to create branded works. Now, everything below here, it is basically options that are relevant for administrators, which I don't want to give to this group, except for the ability to view, edit, and index audio and video intelligence. So I'm pretty happy how the permissions here are working from the group. So permissions, what they can do in the DEM. Now I want to manage their access, which categories they can see in the DEM. So I'm going to click Add, and that will bring me here to the Access page. So I'm going to expand this, and I actually don't want this group to see everything in the DEM. I only want them to have access to Central Canada and all the subcategories within that. You could also, for example, want a group to only have access to some subcategories, for example, those, and that would be completely fine. You are able to really select the access down to the subcategories. I'm going to click Save. And now a pretty cool thing here, since all my groups have the same permissions, just different access, I can copy that group, the Central Canada, and just create a new group called West Coast. All the permissions I have selected will be the same, as I mentioned. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Add. And then here, instead of Central Canada, I will select West Coast. And then you just can keep doing that for all the other groups, which I won't do just due to the time that we have here today. And I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end. So I'm going to pop up back here our PowerPoint. And we are going to go to our best practices, which you actually talked about most of them during our presentation. So the first best practice, define the roles and responsibilities. This one is pretty straightforward. I think we talked quite a bit about that. One recommendation that we have here is to if you are like an organization and you are bringing everyone from your organization to the DEM, to use your departments to get started creating your groups. That probably will give like a good idea of the people that you have to bring into the DEM. The number two, we haven't touched base yet, but is the use the principle of least privilege. So it's always recommended to give users minimal access at their start, minimal access and permissions. as they get used to the DEM. And once they are familiar with it, you can increase their access and their permissions. The reason for that is just easier to increase their access and permissions than to take it back. So that's the principle of least privilege. This one we touched base. The number 3 is keep the number of administrators to a minimum. This minimize the potential of misuse of content, as we said before. And as I've touched base many times during this presentation, create custom user groups, because they have specific permissions that are tailored to particular projects, departments, or functions. And we were talking a little bit, but they are also tied to number 7 that we'll cover in just a few seconds. 5, perform regular audits and reviews. As I said, like based on the principle of least privilege, you probably will need to regularly look at those groups and see if their access or their permissions need to be changed as your organization needs shift. That's likely to happen. So provide user training and documentation. We are happy to help with user training. Again, rely on your customer success manager to help you to set up those trainings for your end users and administrators. And by creating documentation, we recommend creating documentations that really define the user's roles, what are the groups, what permissions they have, so they can be more familiar with the DEM. 7, the scalability and flexibility. Rely on custom user groups because they can help you to easily scale the permissions and access, but also as your organization's growth grows, you can ensure that new users and roles can be accommodated easily. And number 8, we haven't touched base in the presentation at all, but if possible, if you have the budget, use single sign-on. Single sign-on not only helps to manage the user groups and permissions, but it also enhances security, and you can often work with your IT to have those user groups managed, which makes things much, much easier. So by following these best practices, you will be able to create a robust framework for managing user groups and permissions in your DEM. This will ensure security, efficiency, and organization for all your assets. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. I really hope you found this topic useful, that you are leaving here inspired to make your DEM more secure by implementing the correct permissions. I'm happy to answer any questions, but if you want to keep in touch, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or via email. And yeah, let's jump into the Q&A now. Ian, I know there are some questions here in the chat. Do we want to go through them? Do you want to coordinate them? Okay. So Ian, Ian put a question here. So what's your ideal recommendation for the number of custom user groups for an organization of about 50 DEM users? Not the answer that this user is expecting, but there's not an ideal number. It will depend on your necessity, on your needs. So if your organization, you need like to have more user groups because they have different access and different permissions, you need to, you can use as many groups as you wish. One of my recommendations is to really rely on like your structure to make this decision. Okay. Can you create a user group that has access to all categories? Definitely, and that I see in a lot of use cases, because the user groups, they manage two different things, access and permissions. So you might want a group that have access to all categories, but have different permissions from each other. For example, you can have a group that has access to all categories, but they can only download and share. And you might have a user group that have access to all categories, and they can download, share, and upload to be approved by an administrator, for example. Yeah, question. Can one user belong to more than one user group? No. So a user can only belong to one user group, and you can have as many user groups as you wish in the demo. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Laura, we are interested in adding the facial recognition model to our DEM license. However, we are facing pushback on external user accessing privacy information, such as names of individuals in the image. Is there a way to create a group that cannot see names? So there is a way would be hard with facial recognition, but there is a way to create a group that doesn't have access to edit the names for face recognition. I would need to actually investigate this one a little bit more, Laura, but we'll get back to you with more information for sure. How does MediaValet apply the appropriate user group to the right person? I have single sign-on set up, and users are often assigned to their own group. Well, this is something I see a little bit at the beginning of the onboarding. If that's happening to you, reach out to your customer success manager, because we will need to work with your IT. So once you have single sign-on, that is managed by your IT. So you need to email or message your IT to let them know that that user should belong to a certain group, and then the user would be able to be assigned to that group. Yeah. Any more questions? Okay, I think that's it. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure spending this time with you, and I hope our paths cross again. And I wish you a great DEM journey.